As a ghost tour guide, I have experienced my share of horrors in my life. People mostly want to visit famous haunted sites, but a ghost encounter is rare. Not that I don't get scared, mainly because I have seen more staged paranormal than the real ones. Sometimes I have witnessed strange events that I cannot explain, but they have never truly frightened me. It is crucial always to be prepared for the unexpected, as countless terrifying possibilities could arise at any moment. And having one of the most twisted, blood-curdling childhoods my brother and I had, we learned to handle such situations more maturely. It was the start of the winter season, and I had a job in New Orleans. Having agoraphobia, I preferred to drive my way there. After going for approximately 15 hours and only stopping thrice to use the restroom, I began to feel nasty, so I decided to stop at the next love stop. While I was driving, I witnessed something strange. "Is he smashing that empty car in the middle of nowhere?" a voice whispered from behind. "Gosh, that scared me. Can you stop with your sneaking up on me already?" I scolded him for the jump scare. Paul is my brother, and since his long-distance girlfriend also lives in New Orleans, he decided to hitch a free ride out of me. Not in this life, at the very least. If someone were to see your reaction to everything I do, they would never hire you as their guide. He laughed while I rolled my eyes. Anyway, back to the topic. "What is he doing?" he added. I turned my focus on the guy who was maniacally wrecking the car, possibly his own, like it had done him something wrong. He paused as he noticed us approaching, and I couldn't help but notice his gaze trail our car as we drove past him. The way he glared at us with his bloodshot eyes was enough to send me a chill to the marrow. Guess my crack-brained brother sensed the same as he stayed quiet. "Why don't you get some more sleep? I'll wake you up when we arrive at the stop." I looked at the yawning Paul through the mirror, who shifted his gaze from his phone screen to me. "Why don't you take a break and let me drive?" Judging by his expressions, he was being serious. "How about no?" I dismissed him, since there was no way I would let him handle the steering wheel after the accident, but he continued to ask every once in a while that I let him drive. "I won't let something like that happen again, and you know very well it wasn't my fault," he said in a slow, low-pitched complaining tone. "Let's not talk about—" "What the hell? Didn't we pass this road?" He followed my gaze as I scanned in confusion. "Maybe. It's just similar." He halted his words as our eyes landed on a familiar scene. The man thrashed that car. I checked the Google map, and it stated that I was going in the right direction. And the road was a one-way without any possibility for someone to pass it again. How could it be? How are we here again? We were supposed to reach the love stop by now. What in the world was going on? Paul grabbed the map from the back seat and passed it to me as instructed. I knew better than to rely on Google, so I had a habit of carrying one. However, I reached with a flinch when the map displayed the same information. There was no way I would drive by that psycho again, so I grabbed my scrunchie, tied my hair in a bun, and turned the car around. "What are you doing?" Paul asked in confusion. "There has to be another way. Do you think this road is haunted?" My brother wasn't the type to joke around in a serious situation, so saying that meant he seriously considered it a possibility. "Don't be stupid, Paul. There has to be some trick on this road, and we ought to find a different one." My job had shown me many artificial, brilliant, haunted incidents for me to start believing in the paranormal suddenly, and he knew it. And even if this was the real deal, we still needed to get out instead of getting overwhelmed by fear. 20 minutes drive later. I couldn't hear what Josh was saying in his panicky voice, but it must be something similar to what I felt then. How in the world did we get back on this road? Hell no. No matter how terrified I felt, I would not let some possible paranormal get under my skin. I turned the car around again, and we continued to circle the same place for the next 2 hours. That was when I noticed that we were almost out of fuel. But since we had extra in the back of our car, I stopped the car and we got out to refill it. And as I was having the most horrible luck tonight, that man was just a mile away from us, still thrashing that damn car. We were focused on what we were doing when my gaze suddenly went to the man who had started walking toward us. All of a sudden, all my talk about not panicking in such a situation went poof in the air now that I wasn't in the car driving away. Instead, I felt sweat beads slipping down my forehead. The distance was closing rather quicker than how slowly he seemed to walk. "Stay away, or I'm going to call 911. My voice shook, and I could feel my leg telling me they were ready to give up any minute now. That was when the fuel can Paul was using to fill the car tank was thrown at him, emptying its remaining content on that man's body. He looked down with a deadpan expression on his face, and all of a sudden, he started disintegrating with a painful scream. We didn't have enough time to see what would happen next, and since the car had enough fuel to get away from him, we rushed to our seats, and I drove away. Another 20 minutes drive later, I sighed in relief upon catching a glimpse of Love Stop in the distance. Finally, we've broken free from the grasp of a long and mysterious cycle that had us trapped. Brother, it might be a good idea to take a long break and relax before hitting the road again, I said, as I pulled the car over. After exerting ourselves for several hours, it was time to take a much-needed and refreshing shower.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Hey man, good to see you. How are you doing these days? Who's Mason, the guy I've been friends with since elementary school. Ah, good to see you too. I'm good, bro. How about you? I replied. It was a typical normal greeting among each other after meeting for so long. It's not like we're not friends anymore, but it's more like we've gone from being best friends to being kind of friends who only greet each other when they run into one another. So, about me and Mason, the reason we're like this is because of an incident that took place in middle school which scared us so much that whenever we run into each other, all the memories of the past come flooding in our minds. We have made a promise to each other that the day we overcome our trauma, we would start hanging out again, no matter how long it takes. We were in middle school, and it was right after the summer vacation ended that year when Mario Kart Wii was released and was trending like crazy. Now, none of us had the console to play the game in. It was just me and Mason who were best friends, but there were a total of 5 kids. Me, Mason, Theo, and Owen. The 4 of us had been friends forever. It was more like our parents were friends, and that's how we met in elementary school. We were inseparable and loved each other wholeheartedly. Anyway, we planned to ask our parents to buy us a console, and we'd keep asking until they would buy it. But the plan went down the drain, since none of them agreed to buy the console for us. So we decided to find a gaming cafe where we would be able to play the game within our budget. One day Mason, Owen, and I were strolling after school and waiting for Theo to join us after he was done cleaning up the classroom, which by the way was his punishment for skipping class. Mason, you and Theo are in the same class, right? So how did he end up getting caught? I asked. It was some stupid kid who told on him to the teacher, Mason replied while kicking a pebble. Even though the 4 of us were friends, Mason was closer to Theo than the rest of us, and it was because they lived next door to each other. Wow, Owen and I shared something similar as well since we were cousins. We waited almost half an hour until we saw Theo running in our direction, which made our faces light up. Theo had this aura to always keep up the environment with his weird and stupid jokes and his sense of humor. I'm telling you guys, they save money by making students clean in the name of punishment. The moment he caught up to us, he said while panting, I guess he ran from the school. Here, drink some and catch your breath for a few minutes, Owen said while passing the water bottle to Theo. Thanks, man. So, where are we heading to? Theo said while grabbing the bottle from Owen's hand. We'll just keep walking until we find the gaming cafe, I said. We continued our stroll after Theo stopped panting, and as we were walking, we spotted an old-looking cafe. There was a Nintendo sign drawn on the board, so we walked in to check it out. Our eyes went wider as we saw where all kinds of Mario games were, so we went ahead to the counter to ask for the price. And it was within our budget. The price was so low, and they charged hourly, so we decided to start paying for the Mario Kart Wii. The Mario Kart Wii setup was in the left row, so we went there and each of us took a seat. We noticed that there wasn't anyone else around the cafe except for a weird looking kid who was also playing Mario Kart Wii while dressed up as Mario. We ignored the kid and started playing the game. Now that we were playing it, it was so much fun. The gaming cafe was different. There was already a high score with the same name on each of our screens, and it looked quite unbeatable. Hey guys, how about we make a bet? Owen asked all of us all of a sudden as we were playing the game. We're listening, the rest of us said in a synchronized voice. Whichever of us beats the high score on the screen will get a pizza treat from the rest of us, he said while focusing on the game. And you think you're the one who's going to win, right? Theo said with a sarcastic tone. No, I don't think just that. I know that I will be the winner. Owen turned his head over towards him and said very confidently with a smile, Deal. We said it in sync again. After playing for 2 hours, we decided to head home, so we exited the cafe. We noticed the weird kid with Mario's costume was still there playing. From that day onwards, we started coming to the gaming cafe every single day after school to play Mario Kart. It was the 7th day of the week, and we were close to beating the high score, but for some reason, we were not able to do that. We continued playing for a little bit longer, hoping to beat the score on the screen. In your face, Owen. Look, I made a new high score. It was Theo, whom all of a sudden screamed with excitement. He looked at our screens, and it was him who was the top scorer on the screen. It was the first time I noticed the weird kid turning his head in our direction. I guess he must be the one who had the high score that Theo just beat. As promised, we went to his favorite pizza place and contributed into buying him the pizza that he wanted to eat. After that, we ended up having more fun than we imagined and then headed over to our homes. Another bet was made by Theo. Well, it was more like a challenge than any of us had to beat his high score. We could not beat that high score for the next 2 days. And on the 3rd day, Theo did not show up to the cafe, and the high score on the screen was different. It was the weird kid again who had the high score on the screen. We did not pay much attention to it and continued playing the game. The next day, Mason told us that Theo had an argument with his parents and ran away from home. He'd been missing ever since. You know, it's weird, he did not come to any of our houses to stay the night, I said. We all agreed because it was unlike him to do so. He used to have arguments, and whenever he did, he'd always end up spending the night at either one of our houses. And then after that, he'd go home on his own and make up with his parents. So we were a bit worried about him this time. We did not go to the gaming cafe the next few days because there was still no word from Theo. His parents filed a missing person report, and we also helped look around the area for him. But he was nowhere to be found. We assumed that he may have gone to his uncle's house, which sometimes he used to, and since Theo's parents and his uncles were not on good terms, they may have not have called back asking about Theo. After 4 days, we went to the gaming cafe again and decided to beat the high score before Theo comes back, just so that this time it would be one of us bragging about the high score and then getting some pizza. It was Owen this time who beat the weird kid's score, and then managed to get a new high score on the screen. But since Theo wasn't there, he didn't seem too happy about it. He said he would get his pizza after Theo comes back and then just headed home right away. The next day, Owen did not show up to school either. So we got worried about him and went to his home to ask around. His parents told us that he never got back that day, and that they were thinking that he was with one of us. When we told them that Owen left on his own that day, they started getting worried. We searched every possible place that we could think of, but we couldn't find him either. It was exactly like when Theo went missing. That was when it clicked that they both went missing after after being the high score of that weird kid. So we went there to confront him, and instead of denying it, he looked at us with a wicked smile on his face and said, "You guessed right. You should stop coming here as well, or you will end up dying just like your friends." The way he said that was so terrifying that we immediately ran from there. We decided to tell the cops about this, and when we went there with the officers, the weirdest thing happened, which made them think that we were messing around with the officers. There was no gaming cafe there. Instead, there was just an abandoned building with a broken Nintendo sign on it.
This incident happened to me about 6 years ago when I was returning from my office. Back then, I was working as a bank manager in a government-based bank. I was happy with my job, and everything was going swimmingly until that day. One specific day, I had a heck of a lot of work to do, so I was working even after my office hours. That day, I worked till 10 p.m. until everything was finished. After that, I packed my stuff and left the office. I always preferred using public transport, so I went to the bus stop, which was near my office, and waited for the bus to arrive. I kept on waiting for a continuous half an hour, but no bus or other transport seemed to pass through that route since it was already 11 p.m. I thought maybe today I had to book a cab as I was already late, and I didn't want to be late anymore. I was booking a cab when I noticed the bus coming in front of me. I was happy since I was not expecting any public transport buses to come at this late hour. I kept my phone in my pocket and boarded the bus. I went in and sat on the last corner seat. I could see the conductor, but since I could book the ticket online, I didn't go to him and booked the ticket on my own. I was continuously looking at the conductor so that I could show him that I had booked the ticket, but he wasn't looking at me and was continuously looking in front. I had already booked the ticket, so I had no worries, so I sat there as I was exhausted from all the extra work. I closed my eyes, and within a minute, I fell asleep. I was tired, so I didn't notice that I slept for a continuous half an hour. When I woke up, I found my bus standing in an unknown area, totally covered with silence. Everyone in the bus was sitting silently, without saying anything. The weird thing was that they all were looking directly in front, including the conductor, and were not moving at all. I was alone there, moving my body, and looked shocked after seeing my bus standing at such a weird place. I wanted to go out, but the doors of the bus were closed and could only be opened by the driver. I stood up from my seat and went to the conductor to ask him why the bus was standing there and which area was that. I was sure that I had not been to this route before. I went to him and asked him about this, but he didn't listen to me. He kept on looking in front without moving. This was a little strange for me. Soon, I noticed that he was not even blinking his eyes. No human alive could do that for that much time. No, his silent posture was scaring me. I went back to my seat, but as soon as I turned back, I noticed a lady sitting beside me. Honestly, I didn't see her coming in and sitting beside me. I was terrified and was shaking. I just sat beside her and looked at her. She was also gazing in front, without moving, and like the conductor, even she was not blinking her eyes. I offered her a smile, but she didn't smile back. I was feeling uncomfortable in the bus, as no voice was there, no one was talking, even in the very dim light of the moving bus. He felt something sticky in the seat. I looked at my hand and found that my hand was all covered in blood. I screamed with fear, and I saw the lady was bleeding profusely. I was shocked that she was bleeding that much, and even then, she was sitting there so calmly and wasn't even reacting. She started to stare at me, and out of fear, I ran towards the conductor of the bus. I was looking at the lady and explaining the whole situation to the conductor, and I was surprised to death when I looked at his face. He was also bleeding heavily from his head. I jumped to the other seat in fear, and soon I found that everyone there was in the same condition. I started to think that I was in hell. Before I could say anything, the conductor told me, "Sir, don't worry about seeing our blood. We all are dead." That scene was the scariest of all. After this, I ran to the door and started pulling it to open it. Suddenly, the door opened and I was out of the bus. I started running on the road without thinking about the direction, but soon I was hit by an invisible thing and fainted. I don't know what happened after that, but when I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital. Later, I found out that a cop who was passing through that route found me in that condition and took me to the hospital. The cop came and asked me what I was doing there. I told him everything, but he thought that I was drunk or something and didn't believe me. He asked me to take care of myself and left from there. After that day, I didn't tell this incident to anyone because I knew that no one would believe me. But I can never forget that incident, ever in my life.
I've lived in Utah for most of my life other than a few years in Wyoming. I'm an Uber Eats driver in Utah and have been for a couple of years now. What I'm about to tell you took place about 5 days ago. I had just gotten finished with a shift of delivering food and was on the phone with my mother when I got the bright idea to go looking for a former apartment that we had lived in when I was younger. Now, normally I carry my new 9mm on me, but that was at home. So I decided that I would go home to pick it up so that I don't have no defense if I get into a bad situation. My mother had done some research on the address of the apartment. The apartment used to be called Midtown Villa and was never full of gang activity when I was younger. So I had typed the address into my Google Maps and drove over there. I pulled in and realized that the apartment is now called the Calaveras, and everything was now looking better than it used to, so I let my guard down, which looking back on now I regret. I started polling through the apartments with my mom on the phone, which we had then agreed that I could put her on video chat so that she could see the new upgrades. I had pulled back through the entrance off the main road and started showing my mother the building that used to be our apartment building, and I was pointing at the building and empty lot next to it. That empty lot used to be a playground when I was a kid. First mistake. I was using a phone to show my mother, which made it look like I was recording. Second mistake. I was pointing. Third mistake. I was in a bad area and let my guard down. Now, why did I tell you those mistakes? Because what I didn't realize is, while I was showing my mother, I was passing a guy and a girl and pointing. Now I know, all that alone doesn't seem bad, but apparently I angered someone who must have thought that I was recording them. Even though I had my 9mm with me and a loaded magazine, I had made some odd choices due to the fact that I'm a very direct person. As I continue forward, I realize that I'm being chased by the guy who is now on foot after me. He's yelling at me, calling me out and asking if I wanted to tussle after a while of running towards me and taking photos of my car. Now, before realizing it, I was suddenly moving forward faster in my car, and my mind was made up. I was getting out of there and driving off. Now, the events that are about to take place are due to the fact that I have some extensive training outside of others' knowledge, even though I had let most of that slip. My adrenaline was pumping, and instead of harnessing it, I mistakenly let it control my actions. With my mom still on video chat, I suddenly took notice of a car pulling up fast behind me. I took off out of there. The car was then behind me. I turned right. They turned right. Same turn I made again, they followed. So I went up to 9000 South and took a right after stopping, thinking that I was just being paranoid. Nope. They followed me all the way to 1300 West, and that's where I turned right again. And guess who followed? Now, I'm not going to lie. I was very nervous with multiple scenarios playing in my head because I knew that I was in a bad situation. I knew that if it came down to it, I had my pistol. I know what you're thinking. Dial 911. Well, I'm the type of person who rarely does that, and I wanted to get out of this on my own. While all these scenarios crossed my mind, I suddenly got the bright idea to turn right onto 7800 South, so I did, and then they did. But this time, a semi had gotten between us, right behind me. I was happy until the semi had turned left. Then I knew I had to figure out what to do next. My next decision was to turn left. I approached the next light in the left turn lane to get on the road that leads to 7200 South where the I-15 on-ramp was. What I didn't think about was what would happen if they followed me. What will happen next will make you reconsider not asking for help when you need it if you're like me. I turned left, they followed, and sped up on my right in that lane, so I immediately swerved over after turning my signal on and got in front of them, because let's face it, if they get next to me, it could be game over. So I slowed down a little, then they got in the left lane and sped up next to me. So I sped up, and just as we hit 90 miles per hour as well, I slammed on my brakes and they slammed on theirs and turned right. If I had been there, I could have been hit and rolled my car and even died. At the very least, I would be in hospital. That's when they took off down the road on their right, and I booked it to the interstate, drove to a grocery store near my house, and called the police department near the apartment complex to report it. The dispatcher then informed me that I should have called 911 to make the situation easier, and they would have directed me to the nearest police station with officers outside to deal with anything that followed me to the parking lot. The officer then called me and we talked about it, and he had gone on to tell me that that area was very problematic with gang activity. He believes that my extreme concern and judgment were very accurate, so I had made the report just to make it before anyone else had, so I knew that I wouldn't get a knock on the door at some later point. So I then headed home and didn't let my guard down until I got home and knew that I was safe. I told my fiancée about it the very next day, and she told me never to deliver in that area without some form of protection. So in closing, number 1, don't ever leave yourself without protection. Number 2, always ask for help when you need it because otherwise your life could be at stake. Number 3, don't be naive to your situation. I hope this doesn't happen to anyone else, and also just remember that it's not the people with pistols in their holsters that you have to watch out for. It is people who tuck them into their waistbands without a holster that you have to watch out for. Be safe, and thanks for listening.